Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's podcasting is so fun. And like you said, you make it whatever you want it at the end. It kind of spun around because I just wanted to be able to have more raw, real, and authentic conversations for myself, to speak to my audience, but also as I have guests on, where we talk about the actual things behind business. Because on social media, we just see too much of the polished, perfect life and business and how everything you're just making tons of money and it's easy, when really in reality it's not that easy. He said, well, just get started. And so that was really the catalyst for me to finally fully pull the trigger on actually getting started. Yeah, so my idea on starting that podcast as well, besides like getting myself out there for social media purposes, but I wanted to educate people on health and fitness. And my idea was that eventually people will listen to this podcast along with all the other social media stuff I was doing and want to have me coach them on health and fitness.
Today's guest is on a mission to help dads lead with clarity and purpose, both at home and in business. I'm thrilled to welcome Unfiltered Sessions, Christian husband, proud dad of two, speaker, author, business owner, and full-time project manager in the manufacturing world. Philip is the host of the Unfiltered Sessions podcast and a champion of delegation and leadership. After discovering the power of virtual assistants to reclaim his time and grow his business, he now teaches entrepreneurs how to lead more effectively and scale with systems and prioritize what matters most, especially family. Tell us your name, the name of your podcast, and what your podcast is about.
Hey, everybody, I'm Philip Sessions. My podcast is called the Unfiltered Sessions podcast. And so we dive into different things around business and life and really just have an unfiltered conversation. It kind of spun around because I just wanted to be able to have more raw, real, and authentic conversations for myself, to speak to my audience, but also as I have guests on, where we talk about the actual things behind business. Because on social media, we just see too much of the polished, perfect life and business and how everything you're just making tons of money and it's easy, when really in reality it's not that easy. So I wanted to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah. I saw what you did there. You did Unfiltered and then you added your name Sessions, pun intended, and your surname is Sessions too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess I have two names that are pretty good to make some kind of puns or some kind of play on words and everything. So yeah.
Well, I know you talked about, okay, what was the intention of, you talked about how the podcast is meant to go through sessions on business and all that, which is great, but we all have the deep reasons why we start a podcast. We all have that reason. And then sometimes we eventually, of course, helping people is good, but for most of us, we have what led to us, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. And yeah, what was the reason you started the podcast?
So this actually isn't my very first podcast.
Ooh.
My very first podcast was actually called Healthy Living Sessions. So again, another play on the name there. But when I was doing more fitness coaching, and so when I morphed into doing what I do now, which is a virtual assistant agency helping business owners get virtual assistants, I decided to do a name change. But when I first started it, it was more, I saw a lot of other people online, these social media influencers, and how they were using a podcast to be able to get in front of new audiences as well as bring on cool guests and everything. So I wanted to really have cool conversations and get in front of people more. And it was just around this whole health and fitness kind of realm, which was what I was talking a lot about in the first place. And so I just want to get the reps in and get more comfortable speaking, is eventually I wanted to be able to speak on stage in front of audiences as well. And so that was that desire for me to really educate, to get more comfortable with speaking and be able to have cool conversations with cool people.
Can you tell us a bit about the first podcast you started? And if you could give us the timeline of when this podcast was started, that would be really appreciated.
Yeah, that podcast, I want to say it was 2017, somewhere around there. It's 2016, 2017, so somewhere in that frame. Maybe 2018 at the latest. Definitely over 5 years ago is when I started that podcast. And actually, it took me about a year really to get that started. So I had bought the equipment. It was not this particular mic. It was a different mic, completely different setup. I was just winging it as I went. But I spent about a year, bought equipment, was ready to go, had the software downloaded on my computer to do the audio editing because it was audio only for quite a while before I switched to also doing video. And I sat on it for a year until I went to a local event and asked a guy that did a lot of podcasting, was very popular on social media, had like 40,000 followers on Instagram back in like 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. And he said, well, just get started. And so that was really the catalyst for me to finally fully pull the trigger on actually getting started. And so, so it took me about a year of just sitting on it. And I finally got started, just bought some basic low budget equipment and really just kind of took off from there, audio only and everything.
Wow. Okay, that podcast, what's the name of that podcast?
So it was called Healthy Living Sessions. So I think there might still be some on my YouTube channel maybe from that. I know I've got a couple of videos from around that time. It's not necessarily marked as the Healthy Living Sessions podcast, but the podcast itself is dead. I didn't let it just stay aired. I don't want to keep paying the money to keep it hosted. But there are a couple of videos from way back then when I first got into it, where you can tell a lot of a difference of how I speak now versus I spoke back then.
Yeah. Oh, I wish we met before you left. You allowed the podcast to die. I would have said maybe you should have switched your host to a free host and then just allow it be up there.
Yeah, I'm wondering now. You got me kind of curious now to see. I may have that still. I wonder. Yeah, I've still got everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I saved all that. So actually, now looking at it, looks like 2019 was when I started that, or at least when I started dating things. So yeah, a long time ago. So I still have all the audio. I don't have a lot of the video or anything like that, but or I guess I've got some videos, but not too many.
Well,
compared to the audio.
I'm guessing since you stopped the podcast, you're no longer doing healthy. Wait, that podcast, was it a business podcast, or it was just like, okay, I started a podcast, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about health for now, and eventually figure out what we'll do.
Yeah, so my idea on starting that podcast as well, besides like getting myself out there for social media purposes, but I wanted to educate people on health and fitness. And my idea was that eventually people will listen to this podcast along with all the other social media stuff I was doing and want to have me coach them on health and fitness. So I was doing online fitness coaching at the time. And so that was the idea behind that. So usually when I'm going into a podcast, and the reason why I switched my podcast now to like business related and talking about business, the raw and the real, is because I wanted to be more authentic, which I know will attract the people that I want to speak to, which is dadpreneurs or dad entrepreneurs. And with my business services being virtual assistants, where we help business owners get people that help with social media management, do video editing or podcast editing, and do executive assistant type roles, those back office admin type roles, I can then have business owners on as guests, and I'm already talking about business, and I can show my expertise of understanding business, and then again attract clients that way, and then repurpose that podcast content into reels to be able to use for social media and YouTube.
Well, you've been doing your podcast now. These Unfiltered Sessions is how old now?
When did I start that? It's around 6 months or less old.
Wow.
It's not that recent. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's pretty new.
Okay, so when is it completing a year, so that I can know when the birthday party will be organized?
I'd have to go back and look, and maybe I can look at some of my files here again while we're talking.
Yeah, you can check it. Definitely do that. So that's
okay. Actually, I guess that it's just over a year. I see, or no, that's April 25. Looks like the first one I did was January of this year, but then a couple in January. I think February might have been when we officially launched, so somewhere in February.
Okay, so
this year.
In February,
so it's only a couple months old.
In February next year, would be. I'm just writing it down so that I would, touch base and say, "Oh, happy birthday" on your podcast. Yeah. Okay. Wow, that's nice. February. Okay, February, March, April, May. Wow. So it's about 5, 6 months. Yeah. It's really
Yeah.
pretty well. You're active on audio and video.
Yeah, I do have it on both. So I use Buzzsprout for my hosting, and then I use YouTube obviously for the video side of
Yeah.
things.
How's the YouTube doing?
So YouTube's not bad. I mean, we're working on that. Some videos are better than others. As far as YouTube goes, we're more focused on the virtual assistant content versus the podcast content. I mean, of course, that's good as well. But we're more focused in on that virtual assistant content, really trying to make sure that gets up and going. And that's definitely something that's still a work in progress. We're working on making all of that better, our reels better, making the SEO optimizations on the YouTube videos, thumbnails, and all of that. So definitely a work in progress, but a lot better than when I was trying to do it on my own.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I like the concepts of Unfiltered Sessions. I have so many questions for you, honestly. But before we go into some of the other questions I have, can you walk me through what a typical episode on the podcast sounds or looks like?
So a typical episode on the podcast is roughly about 8 to 12 minutes long. So I usually take some kind of idea that I have and break it down maybe into 3 parts. Maybe it's just one long story that then I end with some kind of message, motivational message, or some kind of educational concept behind that. And so just like I'm sounding right now, essentially is how I sound on that podcast. And then we just take the video as well and we put that on YouTube. So you can watch me or you can listen to me on the podcast. And typically we'll do some sound in the background, some kind of like sound music in the background. So it's not just me speaking the whole time. Something kind of light that just is a continuous sound in the background as well.
Yeah. Well, funny thing is, when I heard the podcast name Unfiltered Sessions, the first thing I thought of was therapy. So I was like, oh, in the business, in the podcast, you probably will have someone come on the podcast, and then you would kind of like diagnose the business that, oh, if you get a VA in this place, it will save you a lot of time and probably help you make more money. And then you just get to ask them, and you're like, okay, tell me about this. Oh, what did you do about this? Oh, no, you didn't do this. And it's more like a session for them. That was what I was thinking of. But I was like, wow. So it's, you don't always judge a podcast by its name. Lesson learned.
Yeah.
Note to
Well,
self.
some of that, I mean, that's the idea behind it on the back end, though. So I want to have like a good conversation. So when I have guests on, so I guess I talk, it's primarily just solo episodes, but I have had some guests on. And so we'll kind of talk about business, kind of just life in general, where it's kind of getting to know each other, having a good conversation. But then typically before or after is where then we then have that kind of conversation there where we're actually talking really about, okay, so what is it that you do in business? And then I'm able to kind of explain my services more and everything. That was an idea that I had, but I feel like if I do go that route that you were talking about, where we kind of go in and do like a strategy session, I feel like maybe people might be a little turned off and feel like it's turning into a sales pitch instead of just a podcast having a conversation. So
Ooh.
I've thought about that as well. And that, I mean, that could be something if I have a strategy session with people, I could ask them like, hey, would you mind if I put this on a podcast or anything like that? So I'll have to keep that in mind for when it's an actual like sales call strategy session, but I didn't want to turn my podcast into a sales pitch for my services by bringing somebody on, because I've been on podcasts like that and it's really uncomfortable. Although I would be straight up like, hey, we're going to have a strategy session talking about this to see where a virtual assistant could come in and help you. But I've had podcasts where people will be like, oh yeah, come on the podcast, it'd be great, we'll talk about your business. And then basically they're just on a sales call trying to fact find in my business how they can come in and then help me with their services. And it just feels like they're pulling the carpet out from under you. And it's like, oh, okay, now you need to go wash off, take a shower, because it was such a slimy, salesy conversation, because all it was them just basically having you on a sales call.
Yeah, I mean,
that's recorded.
I mean, the more generous way to do that would be if you could really, really help people without, I know, of course, we want to make sales and all that, but if you said sales call strategy session, we could strip out the sales call, make a strategy session. Look, I'll give an example. I know that there are business owners who would love for you to diagnose their business and just tell them that, oh, no, this stuff is wasting you time. So you spend around 20 hours doing this. No, if you do this, and then you just diagnose them, and they do with that what they want to do. If they would love to work with you, great. If not, awesome. But I feel that
That's a good
oftentimes when
point.
you diagnose people, they usually would want to treat that. And now I'm speaking medically, but if you diagnose someone that,
Yeah.
oh, look, you have this, you need to deal with this, and they see that that stuff is actually true, and based on what they feel, based on how their business is working, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. And it makes sense that they would want to work with you. But if not, no problem.
Mhm.
I mean, you're getting content out of it. The sweet thing about that is that, because of course selling is great, but I'm not talking about, let's just assume that you don't have a product to sell, because when you do strategy session, people find themselves in the person you're doing strategy session with.
Mm.
So if for example, let's say I was a guest on your podcast, and I'm like, okay, if you realize that you spend a lot of time, I'm trying to manage the business, it's hard for you, come on my podcast and I'm going to diagnose your business and show you some ways in which you can optimize the business and find better ways to diagnose it and all that. And now that's like the stuff. It's not like, oh, come on, Cisco, you're not going to try to pitch me, you're not going to try to sell anything to me. Now, of course, during the course of the conversation, I am going to be aware that, oh, you have a virtual assistant service. I'm going like, yeah, it's going to come up conversation. I will know that. But here's the sweet thing is that after you've done the strategy session, you can always, it's your podcast, you can always add what I call it, like a 10 seconds clip on add that. Look, we just diagnosed, after that, how do I explain this now? This commercial stuff they do in podcast.
Mhm.
So maybe in the middle of the conversation, you could cut out to it and say, and then add an intro and something like that, and then say, whoa, we just diagnosed this stuff. If you love for us to do something like that to you, you can probably fill this form and you can come on the podcast and we'll diagnose it for free for you. Or if you already seen instances where you can save time, and depending on the service you offer, come on kind of like a call to action for someone to work with you, because for some reason people will just have guests on your podcast, and some of them, they will be like, by the time you are kind of like doing the strategy session with them, they kind of put themselves in that guest or person's shoe, and they do the strategy session along with you. Yeah, I don't know if it makes sense to you.
No, that does. I'm
Yeah.
actually taking a little note there. Yeah, I like that. I'm gonna have to do that. So I think I'll make a post on that sometime soon and just say, hey, who would love to come on? I would love to do some strategy sessions with people, talk about how you can free up your time, where I see areas you can free up your time. If you want to come on my podcast to talk about that.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of persons see your services, they know your stuff is important, but for some reason they just don't know that. How do I'll give an example. Let's say someone's a doctor, right, and the person is around. They know the person, that the person treats the so and so disease, or let's say cancer. Let's give an example, cancer, right? This person is a doctor, he treats cancer and stuff like that. And you know that they're pretty good at treating cancer and all that, and you follow them on social media and stuff like that. And then one day the doctor is like, "Hey, everybody, I'm doing a free trial, a free testing and all that, and just to check your business and see everything, if everything is looking okay. It's free, absolutely zero cost. You don't have to pay anything." And they're like, "Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna hop on and see." And then they do the test, and you're like, "Okay, you don't have cancer. Everything is good. You're okay." Great, awesome. And then you go your way. And they're like, "Oh, no, dude, thank God we discovered this cancer is the stage so and so. And if we start treating now, we'll be able to yeah, sure. And oftentimes people that they've not really seen the benefit of working with you would eventually say, "Oh yeah, that's true. I totally have to deal with this." And yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Wow.
that makes a lot of sense. I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. This your podcast is what I'm trying to call it, a business podcast, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feeds into your business, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I would consider it a business podcast. Yeah, I just wanted to have like light conversations with people, be raw, real, but yeah, it's a business podcast that does feed into my business, and I'm able to use it for content on social media to build my personal brand as well.
Yeah. I don't know. Right now, as I'm talking to you, an idea just kind of like popped in my head, and I would love to share it with you. And your podcast is Unfiltered Sessions, and we talked about strategy session, coaching section, and something like that. And one of the things I was thinking of is, depending on of course, with the consent of the client, you could do what we call our case study sessions, where over the course of maybe 6 months or 3 months, depending on how long it takes for for you to onboard the client and then for them to start seeing results, you can say, okay, I'll give an example. We could start from the strategy session, and then when they eventually start, and then you just kind of document, okay, these are how much they save, these are how much time they save, these are how much their productivity increase, instead of just a regular testimonial video. Now people get to see the journey and the story. I feel like it's a storyline, so people get to identify themselves in the story, and then they'll make the decision that, oh yeah, I love to for my story to be like this guy too, or this lady too, and I want to work with him too. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's
Yeah.
a podcast. You can basically do whatever you want. Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's another great idea. I
yeah.
like that a lot.
Wow,
And
it's
this is another fun thing that I love about podcasting is that there's always things like this that come up. Typically
yeah,
not in the middle of a podcast. Maybe sometimes in the middle, but there's times like at the end where we're like, "Oh man, I thought about this. Well, have you thought about this?" And like you're actually having those conversations, whether it is going to lead to business or sales, whatever, but you're just having a good conversation with somebody and you kind of bouncing ideas off each other and you get to learn from each other and everything.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's podcasting is so fun. And like you said, you make it whatever you want it at the end of the day.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. I'm curious, what's the workflow like for your podcast? And yeah, what are the apps, the softwares, the tools you use for your podcast?
So I use Riverside as well, just like you.
Wow,
And so after
nice.
I record that, download it, I upload it to Google Drive. I hand it over to my team, and I believe they use Adobe Premiere for the video editing side of things. So they'll go through, they'll edit and optimize that video. They'll put in extra sound bites. They'll put in some B-roll, things of that nature. Really spice it up on the video side. Obviously, the audio side, they just clean it up, make it sound good. Then we use Buzzsprout for the audio. We put the video on YouTube, and then we will then get reels as well out of that. We'll have show notes. So then we then go and post those reels across our social media platforms. Really not to promote the podcast near as much, but more just to be able to use that for business or personal content. So we've got my business page as well as my personal page. And so we use that for either of those. And then on YouTube, I guess we're utilizing those reels more to then point back to the main video.
Yeah, what would you say is like the cost for running the podcast?
I would say it's probably about anywhere from $200 to $500 a month that I'm
Okay.
spending as far as, softwares and then the time for my editors to work on that and post all that on my behalf.
Wow. Okay. Earlier on you mentioned that an episode is about 8 to 12 minutes, and you did mention that you do
Mhm.
interviews. So I'm kind of wondering, how does everything fits together? Do you release every week, every other week? What's the schedule like?
Yeah, so I know I mentioned about the specific VA videos. So on YouTube, it's Monday for that, and then Wednesday for the podcast. So podcast going on YouTube as well. So just once a week right now. I've done it where I've been up to 3 times a week. It gets to be a lot. But I've also done like 2 a week, so a guest and a solo episode every week and everything. And so the reason why I like doing the solo episodes is because I can get more practice on speaking for me. I can take a concept, an idea, and then create a message out of that. And yeah, it's only like 8 to 12 minutes. And when you're going to speak on stage, depending on where you're at, you may be speaking for only 10 minutes. You may be speaking for 30 minutes or an hour. But if I can learn to articulate a message in a short time frame and then learn how to craft stories and make it compelling and interesting, I can certainly go in front of people on stage and be able to do that same thing. So that's why I really like those solo episodes. But the guest episodes are great as well because just like you and I are doing here, we can start to have a conversation and you can learn how to be more conversational in person, which also helps you with your communication skills.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, podcasting is really it's a networking tool. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It's a
Hmm.
networking tool, and it also helps you to like um improve your public speaking. And the funny thing is, you say is that you can be so intentional about it, and choose to say, "Okay, I'm going to design this type of episode because it will help me practice how I speak." And you could also say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm going to do this kind of episode because it's going to help me network with individuals." Or you could say, "I'm going to do this kind of episode because it's going to help me display my authority and my credibility."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly. And then something we're also working on as far as the podcast distribution, and we're planning on doing some email marketing as well weekly. So we'll probably put the VA video in there as well. But like, hey, this week, here's what's happening, whatever. We're still working on the strategy there, but then we'll also mention those videos as well that people can go check out. So hopefully boost the views on that and everything, and then be able to bring in more business at the end of the day, along with educating people.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned email. I'm curious, what's the email like? Do you have subscribers?
So right now I don't. I mean, I've got people that have opted in for other things within my ecosystem, so then I'll use those. I think it's about 1,200 people that'll be on the email list then. So not a small one, but not a huge one either.
Yeah.
But we'll start with that and just start blasting that out essentially weekly as we come up with our strategy. So the plan is by the end of the month that we'll have that together.
Wow. I like that. The podcast is going pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, really focusing heavy on marketing because that's really, to me, where all things start at. You got to get your marketing out there. You have to get yourself, your message out there, and then that starts to build up that top of funnel or the pipeline, and that's what keeps keeping that pipeline full. So then we can continue to work and get people closed to help them out with their business needs, and then we're going to continue to have that. So instead of trying to get somebody in, go all the way through, and then we get them closed and we got to start over, we're trying to keep that constantly flowing.
Yeah, very important. And podcasting itself, it kind of educates people and get them to make their mind such that when they hop on the sales call, the conversations you're having is quite different from someone who probably doesn't even know anything about you.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people don't have a podcast, even though there's a ton of podcasts out there. A lot of people still don't have it. And to this day, when I mention something about having a podcast, people are like, oh man, that's so cool. Like, I wish I had one, or I wish I could do that. It's like, but you can do that. And so podcasting and having your own podcast kind of gives you this extra level of authority. But then on the guesting side too, that's why I love to go on and be a guest as well, because I can learn from different people. I can help, get more content, but then that also creates some SEO, search engine optimization, because now when I'm on your podcast, I'm getting tagged on your podcast, and now that's coming up in the Google searches as well.
Yeah. Oh. How long have you been guesting on podcasts?
I've been guesting since about 2020. I think 2020, 2021, there was a mastermind group I was a part of that had a lot of podcasters. So did a lot back then. And last year alone, I think I did about 30 podcasts guesting on. And so this year I've only done a handful. So I haven't been quite as focused on it, but I'm starting to get back into it. So did actually this week, so I think you're my third podcast this week, actually. So trying to get back into it.
Oh, okay. What was like, what led to the podcast guesting, and why do you even guest as a podcast personally, like your own reason for guesting on podcast? Hey, just a quick break. If you enjoying the insights so far and want even more behind the scenes ideas, inspiration and tools for growing your own podcast, join my email list at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. You get access to helpful resources, exclusive updates, and the kind of stuff I only share with my email subscribers. Whether you're starting out or already podcasting, there's something valuable waiting for you. Head over to mypodcaststory.com/join and subscribe. Now, back to the episode.
So I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun for me. I love to just really educate people. So that's been a fun aspect. But I also see strategy behind that as well, like I mentioned with the SEO. So when I'm on other people's podcasts, if you go search my name, you'll see podcasts, not only my social media content, but you're going to see podcasts that I've been on, especially as they're more ranked or more popular podcasts. You're going to see that even more. So there was a good marketing play from that as well. But then also me going on somebody's podcast, typically I'm able to talk about things of my business or myself. And now I can have better content versus trying to have my own podcast and a guest on there, and then I'm not talking that much.
Yeah.
So now I don't have as much content to share.
Yeah.
And so it was that. And then, of course, getting in front of a new audience. And then also it's a potential a person that could be a potential client. Not that I'm trying to go on there and sell, but now we're building that relationship. And eventually, after we're following each other, then they might want to do business with me, which actually I have a current client right now that I was on his podcast and we just got talking and he was talking about needing a video editor. I was like, well, hey, I can help you get a video editor. He's like, all right, let's do it. And I got him a video editor, and He's been my client ever since then.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you just never know what's going to happen by being on a podcast, but there's just so many marketing benefits to it and
yeah,
networking, like you mentioned.
yeah. I mean, there's a podcast I interviewed quite recently who told me that he gets clients from the guests that come on this podcast. So yeah. So what he does is he looks for guests that the type of ID clients he would love to work with and the type of guests he invites on his shows. And they have a conversations, and in the process of having a conversation, they talk, and then at the end of the day, he tells them that, oh yeah, I do this stuff, I do, and I know if you converse with someone for like an hour or so, there's like a level of trust you kind of build, and like, oh, you instantly know that, okay, well, will I work with this person or will I not work with this person? Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
how he gets his client. Not like the strategy, sales call stuff. No, more like get your. The thing is, if you do your research and you find your ID clients, it's easier to close them than trying to like force the stuff that's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people. I've had different guests. People use their podcast for different stuff. That sometimes I'm like, wow, I probably should be adding the list keeps getting longer and longer of the things you could do with your podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's something that you could create like a little like a free guide or something like that. Like, hey, think about starting a podcast. Here's like the top 10 things that I've seen that people do on their podcast.
Wow.
Be a great way for you to build up an email list.
Yeah. That would be what I would definitely do for my lead magnets. And yeah, I'll just put 30 seconds or 15 seconds ad slot in my content and say, hi, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, or thinking of the possible reasons you could use your podcast for, also the possible things you could use your podcast for, I have to go to so and so mypodcaststory.com/checklist or something like that, and you can download it for free.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, having this
Exactly.
newsletter is very important because with the algorithm and everything that's happening out there, you want to, as much as possible, get more control with your audience than
Yes.
and what the platforms offer.
Yes, exactly. That's the other great thing about having the email list and why you should get that email list. That's definitely something I wish I would have started sooner on. Obviously, I'm still working on some of that as well, but as long as we're getting started, that's the important thing.
Yeah. The sweet thing about email list is that usually what takes time is setting it up. Once you set it up, it just flows. Once in a while you optimize
Yeah.
and maintain it, but it just flows. Like if you created an offer or a lead magnet or something like that, and then you created a 30 seconds or 15 seconds ad slot to put on your show. You basically just, every time your editors want to edit, they add that to every episode. And so this stuff just keeps getting leads and stuff like that. You just, once in a while you change the offer, but yeah, I think it's setting it up. Once you set it up, it just runs itself over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the beauty of the email marketing, of using these digital platforms, that you can set that up, and once you set it up, it's done. With whatever platform you're using. In particular, we use Go High Level. That's our CRM, which has a bunch of stuff in that, so it kind of replaces something like MailChimp as far as email management and stuff like that goes, so we can do automations. And so I definitely have set up different things. And so as I get more back into having consistent guests on, that's my plan as well, is to have some kind of like email sequence that, like, hey, thanks for being a guest on the podcast. Hey, here's a little special treat for you for being a guest on the podcast. Like, so there's going to be some like touches afterwards, because that's one thing that I know I was guilty of when I first started, and I've seen a lot of podcast guests that said, we get on the podcast together and it's like, we had a great conversation, and then it just dies from there. And then and then maybe they remind you, oh, by the way, our episode's coming out, and that's about it. And it's like, cool. So I went on your podcast, and not that I'm asking for you to just give me a bunch of stuff, but you would think that you had me on there for a reason, so why would you not try and keep in touch with me to warm me up even more and keep me in your ecosystem? I was already there. I gave you a lot of my time, and so a lot of people don't think about that. And like I said, I've been guilty of that myself, where I didn't take that time to keep that relationship alive, because you never know what's going to come out of that. And I've had people refer me. They were on my podcast and they didn't want my services, but they referred somebody else to me because of that relationship we kept and everything.
Yeah, the same thing with this follow up and guest relationship management. I feel like it's the setup that takes time. Once you set up a system, kind of like a CRM, such that once you book a guest is booked, it's automatically added. Once the episode is completed, it moves down the pipeline, and then maybe every 1 to 2, 3 months, you kind of like touch base and check on them and say, what's something exciting you're working on, and what's a new project I could probably share with my audience and stuff like that. I mean, it's once it's set up, it's kind of runs itself, and then a little touches and but setting it up in the first place, that's like where the major work is. And
yeah, and even then, like, you know, you talked about like, you know, 2 months out, whatever, you could, like, you don't have to literally have, if you're trying to do once a month touch base with them, you don't need to do all 12 emails at once. You do the one and then come back later in like 2 weeks after you start it. Let's say, you know, we just had this and you have a sequence, you got the first month done, and you come back in 2 weeks after our recording, get the second month done, and another 2 weeks. Like, you could, or just once a week, and then eventually you get to where you have a year's worth, 12 emails that you're sending out to touch base with me and everything. You don't have to do it all at once. But yeah, we, unfortunately, as humans, I think we just think about, I've got to do all of this and it's so much, when really it's just, you can break it down. Like they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And not trying to eat it all at once. You just eat it one bite at a time, and eventually you've ate the whole elephant. And that's the same thing when you do a task like that, like the email campaigns and everything, the follow-ups sequences, the automation, whatever it is, one thing at a time. Just take it one step at a time.
When you started your very first podcast, I noticed that before you started, it took you 1 year from idea, getting the gear, getting everything. It took you 1 year before you eventually started. And your case is not peculiar. It happens to a lot of persons where they have this fancy idea, they've shared it with their friends, they bought the gear, they bought the software, the apps and everything. And then they're like, oh, well, so many reasons. And what would you say was the deepest reason, or the deepest, okay, well, now that you're looking back and you're kind of like analyzing in retrospect, what would you say was the reason why it took that 1 year for you to actually hit record and publish?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact reason, but I would say it was just, you know, being scared. I didn't want to look like an idiot, which when I go back and look at my videos now, I'm like, wow, I sounded terrible. I look terrible. But the thing is, I had to start to get good. And so it was really just the combination of not wanting to look like an idiot and then not really knowing what I wanted to talk about. It was just, I had seen some things. I think at that time, that was when Pat Flynn was like really getting popular and everything. And I was just seeing that, like, oh, podcasting is the thing to do. And so that's what really got me intrigued and wanting to do it. But then, yeah, just sat on the equipment for about a year just because I didn't know what to talk about and I didn't want to look like an idiot.
Yeah. Now that you started, the sweet thing is that as much as it seems like the first podcast died, it did not actually die, because it was that podcast that taught you what it meant to be a podcaster. And now you're showing those skills on this Unfiltered Sessions podcast. You started Unfiltered Sessions. You had an intention in mind. Of course, the major thing was you wanted to help your listeners, but you also wanted to build credibility, build authority, and get some leads for your business. So I'm curious, how is that doing for your business? How's the podcast doing with regards to that goal?
So right now, I mean, it's just getting started up. So I really only have gotten a couple of leads from it so far. So we'll see how it comes along, especially now that I'm just now getting back into having guests on the podcast and everything. But I'm feeling pretty optimistic about it, that it's going to turn into a lot of good leads. And I'm going to take your idea about doing the strategy sessions. I think that'll turn into something really cool and really probably be more fruitful as well as far as lead generation goes.
Yeah. Would you say you have a pretty efficient method of identifying or labeling your lead source?
It definitely could use improvement. I would say it's all right. I wouldn't say it's super efficient though.
So what you're saying in essence is that you really can't say confidently that you are accounting for all the people that came from your podcast as leads. Did you get the question? Hello?
I think I lost you.
Hello? So sorry for the breaking transmission.
That's okay.
Yeah. I was before.
Yeah. So
did you get the question before the break?
Where I last heard you was that so you can say confidently, and that was
So yeah,
that was where I lost you.
Yeah. So what I was saying was that you can't say confidently that you can account for all the leads that are coming from your podcast.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, it'll really be nice if we can, really track down to the bottom, possibly ask the leads and say, okay, where did you hear first hear about me? How did you kind of like, make up your mind to work with me, so that we really know how the podcast is doing and how what the listeners or the leads they are using the podcast for. I mean, you could have an intention for the podcast that, I want the podcast to be really inspiring. And then the people say, well, I was kind of on the fence, but when I listened to your podcast, I kind of made up my mind that I was going to work with you. And then probably 20, 30 persons, they say that. You're like, okay, it appears that people use my podcast to educate and learn and then answer all their questions and skepticism before they work with me. And, I mean, it's important we talk to our listeners if we're privileged to have that opportunity.
Yeah. I would say my leads have been more coming from the guest coming on my podcast versus people listening to the podcast. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I would ask right now. My curiosity is it's kind of like nudging me to ask. In terms of numbers, how's the podcast doing?
I think we're doing about 40 downloads a week.
Wow.
So not the best, but definitely better than a lot of podcasts as well.
I mean, you're up there, top 1%.
Yeah.
I mean, the podcast is pretty young. It's about 5 months, 6 months ish. And there are a lot of room for growth. There are a lot of room for optimization. There are a lot of room for promoting the podcast and all that. And so I think the follow-up question would be, what is your major growth strategy for the podcast?
So the growth strategy for the podcast would be doing more guest episodes, but then also being more open about what's going on with my business and talking more directly to the dadpreneurs, which is really my target audience.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know you talked earlier about the YouTube, but YouTube is one of is a really powerful growth lever for businesses. If you know how to work the magic. So how's the YouTube doing?
It definitely needs some work. I mean, we're working through that. We're trying to figure out how to optimize better, and then working on just really working on that. So still trying to figure all that out.
Okay. Please, when you do figure it out, let me know so that we can share some of the secrets and probably have you back on the podcast so you can share some of the gold with us.
Yeah. I'm hoping we can figure it out at some point.
Yeah.
So, working through that, getting the thumbnails down, now trying to get all the tags and everything like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier on, you said the major reason you started the podcast was you're hoping to work before you even start the business podcast, which now is, as a businessman, you expect to kind of enlighten, educate your prospective clients and then help them, which of course is nice, and then also get paid, which that's why you're a business. If not, you become a charity. Before then, you started the podcast because you wanted to become really good at speaking and improve and become better, right? How from now and back in 5 years ago, how would you say is the improvement?
It's been huge. Back then, what you would have seen for me is kind of talking like this. So I'm just really excited to be here on this podcast. I'm just really excited to talk with you today. That's what I would have sounded like. Just super monotone, super just even. Don't have any expression in my voice and how I'm my mannerisms. Obviously, when you're sitting, it's a lot harder to be more expressive and everything. But I was just so monotone and sounded so boring and dull. I had no vocal variety or tonality in my voice, and so that's probably, from the podcast perspective, one of the biggest differences. The other thing is really being able to actually articulate a thought and being very clear and concise with that. I could obviously expand on an idea a ton more if I wanted to, but I know how to try and bring in some kind of analogy now, some kind of small story to bring my point home of what I want to explain to you, versus back then I would probably just ramble on forever. Or if I didn't ramble on forever, just be like, I could have given a short answer like, oh yeah, it's changed a lot. And that's probably what I'd done. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's been really good to change my speaking.
Yeah.
And then that'd have been it. Been a terrible answer.
Okay.
So I've been able to learn how to articulate a lot better, as well as speak a lot better with that tonality and be more engaging because of that.
Yeah. it's incredible what you just shared with us, but I would love for us to do something really different, something out of the ordinary. I'd love for our listeners to get an opportunity to hear you before. They've heard you after, which is now. They've heard you speak for about 40 minutes. And can we hear the episodes from 5 years ago?
Let's see.
Okay, give us the worst, the really,
I don't
really
know if it's
terrible.
an episode. I'm gonna see if I can find a. I think I've got
You know,
a
you can share the
YouTube
screen, right?
video. Yeah, let me
Yeah,
hold on. Let me try and find a YouTube video first.
you can sort it by the oldest, and then let's.
So trying to podcast appearances. There's one in particular I remember seeing, and I just like, oh man, it was terrible. That's 5 years ago. Let's see, how can I sort this? Sort state added oldest. Let's see. Okay, this is one. Let me come back over here. I will share my screen. Audio set. Okay, let me
Wait. Can you pause it a bit?
Yeah.
Are you the one? Wait, who are you?
I'm the one here on the left with the
Okay,
glasses.
because it appears to me that the guy on the other side is the one hosting the conversation.
And he's it's I was on his podcast, so I was a guest on it.
Okay, because I was seeing the head.
Yeah, this isn't from my podcast. This is 5 years ago.
Okay. Continue. Sorry for the
Yeah.
interruption.
You're good.
Yeah.
This is let's see, we can skip forward
see
something
teenage
else.
Steph for a couple years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty rough.
Yeah. You can switch back to yeah. Wow. Man, oh man.
Yeah, completely different.
You have to start to be good. That's the irony of it all. Because most people don't start because they're terrible. And so they never become good.
Yeah.
And because they never become good, they never start. Man, wow. For me, I feel that it's inspiring because now you can tell people, go check out my old episode. It's there. And people would see that, wow, this guy, he has been, it's something that's really inspiring. Other than and like, well, you were always good. That's why you are doing it. And you're like, and then you want to say, okay, my previous episode, but there's nothing to show. Like, for people to see, wow, that's nice. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
wow.
Sure. I need to tell the team to go back and take some content from that and show like how the evolution of getting better, just getting started, just going after it.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many content ideas you could possibly get from it. That's the sweet thing about podcast episodes. When you do podcast episodes, there are multiple ways you could repurpose it. Multiple ways you could repurpose it, and especially if it's really a really good conversation, there's so many things you could make out of it, or like other pieces of content. Yeah. Wow. That's fantastic. Wow. I'm glad you took that bold step with Healthy Living Session, and I'm glad that even though Healthy Living Session kind of like phased out, and now you're doing Unfiltered sessions. Yeah, I'm optimistic what Unfiltered session becomes. I understand. At a point in time, at the end of the day, we just have to experiment and test and see what works, and then double down on what's working. Yeah. Oh, it's been a really interesting conversation, and it seems as if we just got started. Yeah.
Time evaporates on podcasts.
Yeah. Wow. The funny thing is, most times, it's not even sometimes, we are our own biggest enemy. We are the one who reject ourselves, who judge ourselves before the word even opens their mouth to speak. We've already ridiculed ourselves and called ourselves nothing. Because I'm like, well, it's all right. Thank you so much for coming on the
we
podcast.
are our own worst enemies. We have to get out of our own way and realize that most people don't care about us at the end of the day, so they're not even there. They're not even judging us. And if they are, that typically means that we're beyond them and they're just really jealous of us at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
stop worrying about what other people think. Go after your dreams.
The strange thing is that even if someone was to tell us actual, I mean, we would have an enemy to fight, to say, okay, who are you to tell me that I can't succeed? I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to do this. But when we tell ourselves, it doesn't even seem like we're the one limiting ourselves. It's more like, we're giving ourselves, it won't work. There are reasons this, there are reasons that. And yeah, wow. I mean, you've built your portfolio to the extent now that you can even reach out to people and say, I have a podcast. Or probably they call you for a speaking gig. And you can say, yeah, that's true. Have you ever gotten a speaking gig from your podcast?
I don't think directly. I mean, maybe just from, again, having the conversation with people and people knowing that I have the podcast and speak and stuff like that, that I've gotten it, but I don't know about directly.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I guess now that we're coming to the end of the episode, the last question I would ask you is, what's one piece of advice you have for people that are just thinking of starting their podcast, or they started their podcast and they kind of like pod faded, they stopped, they kind of gave up on the podcast, and yeah, what do you have for them?
So first of all, just get started or just keep going. It's going to get better, but you have to start somewhere. Don't worry about how you are now. Think about where you want to be. And that person that you want to be down the road is somebody that does podcasting, most likely. And they're out there speaking, they're putting themselves out there. And so think about the person you want to be and start taking those actions today that person already does. So kind of like a be it until you become it. Be the podcaster, and then soon enough you'll become a podcaster.
Yeah.
Because you've already started doing the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Philip, for coming on the podcast. I'm hoping your podcast has over the course of maybe 2-3 months, there's an explosive growth on it, and then whether business wise, whether listener wise, whatever the case might be. And then I get to have you back on the podcast, and we'll get to have a pretty exciting.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Wisdom, for having me on. This is awesome. And,
Yeah.
and I hope for the best of success on your podcast as well.
Yeah, where can listeners learn more about you, your business, and what you do?
You can go to refinedva.com, or you can go to any of the social media platforms and find me at Philip Sessions.
That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I am Wisdom Okonkwo, and I hope this conversation sparked new ideas and gave you a deeper look into the heart of podcasting. If you've loved this episode, consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Every bit helps keep the stories going. And hey, don't forget to follow, rate, and share this podcast with another podcaster or creator who would find it helpful. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Hello, and welcome to my podcast story, the show where I go behind the mic with podcast creators to uncover the real stories behind their shows. I am your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and every week I sit down with podcasters from around the world, explore how they create, what inspires them, challenges they face, and how they are making their mark, whether it's for passion, profit, or both. If you've ever wondered how podcast hosts manage their workflow, what keeps them going, or what it really takes to build a podcast that resonates, you are in the right place. So sit back, get inspired, and let's dive into today's episode.